Hello guys, today we discuss about the last topic of second module in water supply and treatment engineering, that is intake structures. First of all, we will go for what is actually an intake structure. So intakes are the structures used for admitting water from the surface sources like a river or reservoir or lake and conveying it into the further to the treatment plant. So generally an intake is a masonry or concrete structure with the aim of providing relatively clean water free from pollution, sand and objectionable floating materials. So which are the factors which governs the location of an intake structure? So the site should be very near to the treatment plant so that the cost of conveying the water to the city will get reduced. So second one is the intake must be located in purer zone of the source to draw best quality of water, which relatively reduces the load on the treatment unit. So next, the intake must never be located in the downstream where exactly there may be a chances of mixing of wastewater, because in the downstream always the wastewater will get uh, attached. So it is not the way to provide intake structures in the downstream side. So the site should be such as to permit greater withdrawal of water if required in future. In future, if a greater amount of water is required, so from the one side of the intake structure, it has to be supply more quantity of water in the future. So the intake must be located at a place from where it can be draw water even during the driest season. So even during the summer season, the water has to be supplied to the treatment plant and to the public. On that location, the intake structure should be located. The intake site should remain easily accessible during the floods and should not get flooded. So moreover, the flood water should not be concentrated in the vicinity of the intake. So it should be very easily identified during the flood regions where exactly the intake structure is, and it should not be flooded during the flood conditions. So which are the types of intakes? According to the type of sources, according to the position of intake, according to the presence of water in the tower, it is subdivided like according to the type of sources: river intake, canal intake, reservoir intake and lake intake. And according to the position of intake, it is submerged intake and exposed intake. And according to the presence of water in the tower, it may be wet intake and dry intake. First we will go for river intake. What is river intake is located? It is river intake is located on the upstream side of the city to get comparatively better quality of water. They are either located sufficiently inside the river so that the necessary demand of water can be met in all the seasons of the year, or they may be located near the river bank where a sufficient depth of water is available. So these are all the two conditions has to be conquered. So next, sometimes an approach channel is constructed and water is led to the intake tower. So if the water level in the river is low, a weir may be constructed to increase the depth of the water, and again that water is diverted into the intake structure and then to the treatment plant. The intake towers permits entry of water through several entry ports depending upon the levels scope up, because there may be a chance of fluctuations and as the season changes. So intake the water has to be included into the intake structure from different levels. So different entry ports has to be maintained. These entry ports are sometimes known as penstocks and are provided with suitably designed screens to exclude debris and floating materials. So floating and debris should not be entered into the intake structure, maybe hamper, because if it enters, so during the pumping it may be choke your penstocks, or it may be choke your pipes. So there may be a chance of blockages of the pipes. So we have to provide some screens. So entry ports contain valves which can be operated from upper part of the well. So it is the diagram which shows river intake. So I'm talking outside of the river intake, that is a high flood level and the penstock is there, and approach channel low water level, and penstock again it is the river bed, whereas in the right side there is a drain and bank, and next wet intake well, etc. And inside the wet intake structure there is one penstock which enters through penstock. Water enters into the intake structure, and water fills in the intake structure, and finally there is one screen which is provided at the bottom of the intake structure. When water gets sucked and when it is pumped into the water treatment plant, the water starts entering into the pipe. Before entering to the pipe, the screen is provided just to avoid the debris entry. Next, canal intake. In case of small town or a nearby irrigation, a canal can be used as the source of the water. So the intake well is generally located in the bank of the canal. Since the water level is more or less constant, there is no need of providing inlets at different depths. So in the canal, some depth of water has to be maintained, so that depth is always constant. There will be no fluctuations in the depth or levels of the water. So since the flow area in the canal is obstructed by the construction of intake well, the flow velocity in the canal may be get reduced. So the canal should be lined on the upstream and downstream side of the intake to prevent the erosion of sides and the bed of the channel. So it essentially consists of a concrete or masonry intake chamber or of a rectangular shape, and the fine screen is provided over the bell mouth entry of the outlet pipe. The bell mouth entry is located below the expected low water level in the canal, just to get the water in almost all the seasons. And water may flow from outlet pipe under gravity if the filter house is situated at the lower elevation. So otherwise the outlet pipe may serve as a suction pipe, and the pump house may be located or near the canal bank. So the intake chamber is so constructed that it does not offer any appreciable resistance to normal flow in the channel. Otherwise, the intake chamber is located inside the canal bank itself. Near the location of the intake work, the canal is completely lined. So this is the diagram. Again, left side you have all the levels, FSL and low water level and canal flow, and course screen you can see from where water exactly enters into the canal intake. And in canal intake you can see control room at the top, where exactly your walls are present. You can control the entire flow of the flow into the intake and from the intake well. And fine screen is provided, that is called bell shaped pipe you can see. So fine screen is provided at the top. From there water enters into the wall, enters into the pipe, and it moves. So valve is also installed just to regulate the water flow. And this water may be gravity flow into the next step, or it may be pumped into the next step, where exactly your water has to be get purified. So next we will go for reservoir intake, where when the flow in the river is not guaranteed throughout the year, so a dam is constructed across it to store the water and to increase the depth of the water. So reservoir intakes are practically similar to the river intake itself, except that these are located near the upstream face of the dam, where maximum depth of water is available. So reservoir intake is always located where exactly the depth is maximum in the source. The intake is constructed near the toe of the dam. The access to the intake tower is provided through a footbridge. So water may be enter the well through a number of entry ports depending upon the level of the water, and water level in the well is practically the same as the reservoir level itself. The walls of the entry ports are operated from the gatehouse located at the top of the well. From the well, water is led to the downstream through a suitably designed conduit which passes through the body of the earth dam. So it is the typical reservoir intake. Again, there are different water levels, and again you have a bell-shaped pipe with the screens at the top, where exactly your debris and floating materials will stop, and your pure water enters into the intake. And in the intake structure, the water gets stored, and at the bottom there is one pipe which withdraw the water from the intake structure to the necessary treatment units. and you have to provide some outlet valves just to regulate the water supply. Next we will go for lake intake. Lake intakes are similar to reservoir intakes if the depth of the water is reasonable. That is, if the depth of the water available is more, then you can go for we can go for reservoir intake. Whereas the depth is shallow, then we go for lake intake. If however the depth of water near the bank is shallow, the greater depth is available only at its center. So on the banks, if the depth is very less, so always there is a chance of getting more depths at the center. So submerged intakes are constructed as cribs or bell mouths. The cribs are made of a heavy timber framework which is partly or wholly filled with the riprap to protect the intake conduit against damage by waves. So the top of the crib is covered with the cast iron or mesh grating. Then this is the diagram which shows the lake intake. Lake level is at the top, so it is the depth, maximum depth, and this lake intake is provided at the middle or center of the lake, and you can see the river bed and rocks at the adjacent sides. Water enters into the through the cover, and then it is supplied into the bank. Next, the second classification is according to the position of intake. So first one is submerged intake, where exactly the intake is completely submerged under the water. So they are less expensive to construct, but very difficult to maintain. And exposed intake is like in the form of these are in the form of well or tower constructed near the bank of river, or in some cases even away from the bank of river. They are more common due to ease in operation and maintenance. Next, according to presence of water in the tower. So wet intake and dry intake, it is again classified as. So wet intake is the type of intake tower in which the water level is practically the same as that of water level which is present in the supply, source of supply. Such intakes are also called as jack well and is most commonly used. So what is the level in the level present in the source? The same level of water is present in the intake structure. Then this type of structures are called wet intake structures. Whereas dry intake is there is no water in the intake tower. Water enters through entry port directly into the convey pipes. So it enters into the entry port and directly exit from the conveyance pipes. So the dry intake towers is simply used for the operation of valves. So nothing else. It won't store the water. It's just a structure which controls the flow of water from the source into the treatment or into the city. So the tower is simply used for the operation of valves. So this is the diagram which shows the intake well or wall tower for concrete gravity or masonry dams. Again, in the left side you can see different levels, that is the NPL, normal pool level or minimum pool level, and there are bell-shaped pipes with the screens. Water will enter into the intake well, where walls are regulated in each pipes just to regulate the water entry, the discharge into the intake well, and from the bottom of the intake well it is then supplied to the gravity mains, and outlet valves are provided at the uh, provided at the penstocks just to avoid the choking of the water from the high speed. Thank you.